Have you ever imagined a woman leading an army in a battle that seemed completely impossible to win? In the ancient world, where wars were fought by men and women's roles were limited, one woman dared to challenge all expectations and rise as the leader of Israel in one of the greatest conflicts in its history. This woman is Deborah, the only judge of Israel, a figure who not only had the courage to lead a nation, but also to face a formidable enemy, commanded by a general so powerful that victory seemed inevitable. What's even more surprising is that, in addition to being a strategic warrior, Deborah was a prophetess, directly guided by God, who used her faith and wisdom to give the Israelites a chance no one else believed was possible. But what happened when she defied the impossible and led a battle that would change the course of Israel's history? How is it that a woman, in a world dominated by men, was able to become the heroine of an entire nation? In this video, we will explore the incredible journey of Deborah, a woman whose courage, vision, and faith became a landmark in Israel's history. Stay with me until the end to discover how she turned a lost battle into an epic victory and left a legacy that continues to inspire generations. Get ready to be amazed by the power of a woman facing an apparently impossible challenge. In a time when leadership was almost exclusively reserved for men, one woman stood out in Israel in a way no one could have predicted. Her name was Deborah, and she was not just a wife or mother, but the only judge of Israel, a position of great importance. The society of her time was not accustomed to seeing women in command roles, but Deborah challenged that reality with courage and determination. Under the palm of Deborah, she would sit to judge the people's disputes, make decisions, and deliver God's messages. She didn't need a sword or an army to be feared and respected. Her wisdom and her connection with the divine were her true strength. With every word, with every action, she showed that leadership is not about gender, but about character and faith. The story of Deborah teaches us that being a leader doesn't mean following traditional paths, but rather having the courage to do what is right, even when everyone around you expects something different. She was the voice of God for the people of Israel, and her name was etched in history not just as a judge, but as a woman who led with wisdom, faith, and unwavering courage. After Joshua's death, Israel's leadership became disorganized and directionless. The people of Israel entered a turbulent period, without a single leader to guide them firmly and consistently. Instead, they lived under a repetitive cycle of disobedience to God, which led them to suffer oppression from enemy nations until, finally, they cried out for help. This cycle repeated endlessly: apostasy, suffering, and deliverance. During this period, Israel was governed by judges, men and women chosen by God to lead the people in times of crisis. However, Israel's situation was unstable, marked by constant changes in rulers and a lack of unity. The absence of clear leadership resulted in confusion and weakness, and the people often turned away from God, worshiping idols and seeking strength in things that didn't offer true protection. Meanwhile, neighboring nations like the Canaanites took advantage of Israel's weakness and oppressed them, leading them to misery. The story of the Judges is a reflection of the constant struggle between the people and their faithfulness to God, with each judge arising as a divine answer to the people's cry, bringing brief peace until the cycle began again. It was in this chaotic and desperate scenario that Deborah arose, an unexpected leader in a divided land, and her story began to shine, offering the people a new hope in times of darkness. Despite all of God's interventions and past victories, the people of Israel seemed trapped in an endless cycle of unfaithfulness. After each rescue, each deliverance from God, they quickly forgot the blessings received and turned away from Him again. Their addiction to worshiping foreign gods, idols that couldn't save them, was too strong. They exchanged the protection and guidance of the God of Israel for the worship of gods, who ultimately left them vulnerable. This abandonment of God didn't happen because they forgot the miracles they had experienced, but because the temptations of the surrounding culture were overwhelming. Sometimes, it seemed easier to follow the practices of other nations, which offered a more immediate life without the demands of holiness and obedience. This turning away brought oppression, for when Israel turned to other gods, God allowed enemy nations to dominate them as a way of calling their attention and bringing them back to the right path. Each time the suffering became unbearable, the people cried out to God, and He, in His mercy, raised up a new leader, a judge, to deliver them. However, over time, the cycle repeated: apostasy, oppression, and finally deliverance. It was a painful cycle, but also an opportunity for learning. With every mistake, a chance to repent and start again. And it was in this context of struggling with their own weaknesses and unfaithfulness that Israel urgently needed true and firm leadership. This was the scenario when Deborah stepped in, a woman of unwavering faith, who would become the key to breaking this cycle of unfaithfulness and bring hope to the people of Israel. For 20 years, the people of Israel lived under the brutal rule of Jabin, the king of Canaan. His reign was marked by relentless oppression, and his military strength seemed impossible to defeat. Jabin had with him Sisera, his military commander, a shrewd and fierce man known for his strategic skill. Together, they possessed 900 iron chariots, a military force feared by all, especially the Israelites, who were unarmed and at the mercy of this advanced technology for the time. Sisera's iron chariots were a true force of destruction. When the Israelites tried to rise up against him, they were easily crushed under the power of these chariots. The military superiority of the Canaanites seemed absolute, and the people of Israel lived under a constant sense of fear and helplessness. The land was in agony, and the people cried out to God, asking for deliverance, feeling crushed by the strength of the Canaanite empire. But God, in his faithfulness, had not abandoned them. He knew the oppression his people were suffering, and he had already begun to act to change this situation. Israel's deliverance was near, and a leader would arise to challenge this tyranny. A woman named Deborah would be called by God to be the voice of change, to confront Jabin and Sisera, and lead Israel to victory over their oppressors. While Jabin continued his reign, the spirit of hope began to rise among the Israelites, not knowing that the key to their liberation was about to be placed in the hands of a woman who, with courage and faith, would challenge the entire system of oppression that held them captive. It was in this dark and oppressive scenario that Deborah appeared as a light of hope for the people of Israel. Sitting under the famous palm of Deborah, she exercised her authority as a judge, resolving disputes and guiding the people with wisdom. But she wasn't just a political leader or a wise counselor. Deborah was also a prophetess, someone chosen by God to deliver his words directly to the people. What made Deborah even more extraordinary was her ability to hear God's voice and act according to his will, even in difficult times. She didn't lead by force or fear, but by unwavering faith and trust that God would guide her every step. Her leadership wasn't just based on the ability to make fair decisions, but also on a deep spiritual connection that made her respected and feared by Israel's enemies. Every time someone needed wisdom or divine intervention, it was almost natural for them to seek Deborah. Under the shade of her palm tree, she offered guidance, resolved disputes, and spoke with authority, not just as a judge, but as a messenger of God himself. Her role as a prophetess placed her in a unique position. She didn't just see the needs of the people, but also the solutions God was preparing, guiding Israel according to his divine plan. When the oppression of Jabin and Sisera reached its peak, Deborah knew the time for deliverance was near. She not only trusted in God, but also knew she was about to play a crucial role in restoring Israel's freedom. Deborah was more than ready to lead, with a faith so strong that even the harshness of the battle ahead could not deter her determination to fulfill God's will. In a society where men were the only ones recognized as leaders, Deborah emerged as a remarkable and inspiring figure. In a time when women had almost no voice in matters of authority, her leadership was a breath of change. Being a female judge in Israel was unexpected, a stark contrast to the traditional view people had of who should govern. But Deborah was not intimidated by this. She was not there to follow standards, but to do what was right. Israel was in crisis, living under the rule of Jabin and his iron chariots, and it was at this moment of desperation that Deborah stood out. She wasn't just a political leader or a wise counselor, but also a woman of deep faith who constantly sought God's guidance. That made all the difference. When people came to her for counsel, Deborah didn't just give answers, she conveyed something much more important: the assurance that God was with her and with the people, even in the darkest times. Despite her position, Deborah didn't try to behave like the male leaders of her time. She didn't need to command respect with force or aggression. On the contrary, her leadership was marked by wisdom, justice, and sensitivity. She had the ability to listen to people, understand their struggles, and offer solutions that were both practical and spiritual. Her leadership style showed that being firm didn't mean being rigid, and being powerful didn't mean being cruel. In that society, many doubted a woman's ability to lead. But over time, the people of Israel began to see Deborah differently. She wasn't just a woman holding an important position. She was a true leader who knew how to guide her people with courage and discernment. Deborah's strength lay in her unwavering faith, her ability to trust in God, and that inspired those around her. Looking at her, the people of Israel were reminded that true leadership doesn't come from where you expect it, but from who you are, someone with a steadfast heart and a strong spirit, ready to make a difference, regardless of the challenges ahead. When Israel's suffering reached its peak, God, once again, looked upon his people with mercy and heard their cry. He knew the time for deliverance had come. It was in this context of desperation and prayer that Deborah received a clear and powerful mission from God. It was time to challenge Jabin, the king of Canaan, and free Israel from his oppression. Deborah, fully trusting in God, knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But she also knew that God would never fail. The mission was clear: gather an army and defeat Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, who had already oppressed Israel for 20 years. God revealed to Deborah that it was time to unite the tribes of Israel and go to battle. She then sent a message to Barak, Israel's military commander, to gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and prepare to face the Canaanite army. The order was direct, with no room for doubt. Victory would come, but God wanted to use his people's hands to bring it. Deborah was not alone in this mission. She knew that her strength came from God and that the people of Israel needed to respond to his call. She knew that deliverance would come, but the people would have to act. The call was made. Barak was to lead the army, and Deborah, with her courage and faith, would take on the role of spiritual guide. She didn't limit herself to being just an advisor. She became an active participant in God's plan. Although Deborah was confident that God would give them the victory, she knew the struggle would be hard, but she also knew that Israel was no longer alone. God was with them, as he had always been. Deborah didn't hesitate, and her leadership grew even stronger. She understood that her mission was clear: to restore the dignity of the people of Israel, to free them from oppression, and to lead them back to freedom. God had given the command, and she, with unwavering faith, was preparing to act. Despite the clear command and the confidence in God that Deborah had, when she called on Barak, Israel's military commander, his response was far from immediate. Although he knew that defeating Sisera was essential, Barak didn't feel completely secure in acting without Deborah's presence by his side. He hesitated, showing that, though he was a strong leader, his faith was not yet fully firm. Barak knew that Deborah wasn't just a political leader but a prophetess, someone with a direct connection to God. Her presence meant that he would have divine direction, and that gave him confidence. But by asking her to go with him, Barak showed a certain apprehension. He wanted to be certain that, with her by his side, he could defeat the Canaanite army and fulfill God's mission. He said to Deborah, "If you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." Barak's hesitation wasn't a doubt in God's power, but a reflection of his own insecurity. He knew the battle would be tough, and without God's help, he wouldn't stand a chance. But he also knew that with Deborah by his side, he would be fulfilling God's command with more certainty that victory would come. Deborah, with a patience and wisdom that only she possessed, responded, "All right, I will go with you. But because of your hesitation, the honor of the victory will not be yours, for Sisera will be delivered into the hands of a woman." Though Barak was the leader of the army, Deborah prophesied that the victory would ultimately not be marked by his name, but by a woman who would make the difference in the battle. Despite his hesitation, Barak accepted Deborah's guidance. Her faith was what propelled the confidence he needed to go into battle, even though his role in the victory would be less than expected. With Deborah by his side, he felt secure enough to gather Israel's forces and prepare for the confrontation with Sisera, the feared commander of the Canaanites. Though Barak didn't have complete confidence in his own ability, he knew that with Deborah, who had God's direction, he wasn't alone. God was present every step of the way, and that certainty was what finally gave Barak the strength to move forward. With Barak's army ready for battle, the moment for action arrived. The tension was palpable, and everyone knew this was a fight for Israel's survival. Deborah, with total confidence in God, not only led spiritually but also followed the specific instructions the Lord had given her. The command was clear. Israel's army was to march to Mount Tabor, a strategic point that rose above the region. Mount Tabor was a natural formation that offered a wide view of the battlefield and was strategically the ideal location to face the Canaanites. By choosing this terrain, God was providing the advantage of elevated ground, something that would be crucial for Israel's victory since Sisera's iron chariots were extremely powerful on flat ground. If the Israelites could lure the enemies into a more disadvantageous area, they would have a chance to win, even being outnumbered and without the technological superiority of the Canaanites. Barak and his army followed Deborah's direction, confident that God would guide them, even though they didn't know exactly how the victory would come. The mountain, with its strategic position, was just the first step in a divine plan that was about to unfold in an extraordinary way. As the Israeli army ascended the slopes of Mount Tabor, they were not only preparing for the physical battle, but also aligning themselves with God's plan. The choice of Mount Tabor as the battlefield was more than just a military decision. It was a lesson in trust in God. Deborah knew that the location not only offered a strategic advantage, but that God would show his power in a clear and unmistakable way. While the Canaanites, confident in their iron chariots and military superiority, were prepared for a direct confrontation, no one expected what was about to happen. And so, with divine guidance, Deborah, Barak, and the Israelite army positioned themselves on Mount Tabor, waiting for the right moment to act. The plan was in motion, and everyone knew that the victory would come not by the strength of the army, but by the direct intervention of God, who would make the impossible possible. On the other side of the battlefield, General Sisera was confident that victory would be his. He commanded an army equipped with the most advanced military technology available, 900 iron chariots. For the Canaanites, these chariots were the key to crushing any opponent, as they were fast, imposing, and unbeatable on flat terrain. Sisera knew that his chariots could easily cut through any attempt at resistance and crush the Israelite army with their iron strength. With this power at his disposal, the Canaanite commander feared no battle. He believed that, no matter how courageous or determined the Israelites were, their military inferiority would be evident. Sisera's iron chariots were formidable weapons, and he had full confidence in the power of his technology to ensure victory. He thought that with these chariots, he could easily defeat Barak's 10,000 men, who, without war chariots, were at a disadvantage. Sisera felt comfortable in his planning. He knew that the flat terrain stretching out before him was ideal for his chariots, and the Israelite army, without this advantage, could not compete. In his mind, victory was already guaranteed. What he didn't know, however, was that something much greater was at stake. The Israelite army was not fighting with the weapons of the world, but with divine power. But the Canaanites' confidence in their military technology ended up being their greatest mistake. They were unprepared for the divine intervention that was about to take place. As Sisera gave orders for the iron chariots to advance across the terrain, he couldn't foresee that God's plan was about to turn everything upside down. The ground, which had seemed perfect for his chariots, would begin to change in an unexpected way, rendering his technological advantage irrelevant. The power of the Canaanite army, so dependent on its chariots, would be undone by something much more powerful and invisible, the hand of God. The moment of battle arrived, and the sun was shining brightly in the sky as the armies took their positions. Sisera's army, with its feared iron chariots, was ready to advance, full of confidence that their technological superiority would guarantee victory. The terrain seemed ideal for the swift and relentless crushing of the Israelites. But then, something strange happened. God, in his infinite wisdom and power, intervened in a supernatural way. A fierce storm began to form in the sky, and dark clouds covered the landscape. Before the Canaanites could understand what was happening, a torrential rain poured down over the field. The ground, which had been dry and firm, turned into a quagmire, making it impossible for Sisera's iron chariots to advance. The Canaanite soldiers, who had relied completely on the speed and strength of their chariots, were caught off guard. The soaked ground rendered the chariots useless, as they sank into the mud, becoming heavy and slow. They could no longer maneuver with the agility needed to attack the Israelites. The military power that had given Sisera and his army so much confidence vanished before the force of nature, and the battle turned into total chaos. While Sisera's iron chariots were stuck in the mud, the Israelite army, which had wisely positioned itself on Mount Tabor, was ready to seize the opportunity. Divine intervention did not just change the terrain. God's trust in the battle caused the Israelite soldiers to rise with renewed strength. Confusion spread among the Canaanite army, while the people of Israel, in communion with God's will, advanced, striking decisive blows. The storm wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a clear sign that God was fighting for Israel. The military strength of the Canaanites disintegrated, and the battle that had seemed lost for the Israelites turned into an overwhelming victory. God had intervened directly in the fight, making the iron chariots, symbols of power and superiority, useless. Human power was undone before divine power, and the Israelites were now on a clear path to victory. The battle took an unexpected turn. When the storm began, Sisera's army became disoriented. His iron chariots, once so imposing and unbeatable, were now stuck in the mud, preventing their drivers from advancing. Confusion spread quickly, and the Canaanite soldiers, who had once felt invincible, were now disorganized and vulnerable. The advantage of the Israelites, led by Barak and guided by Deborah's faith, became clear. With the iron chariots immobilized and the morale of the Canaanite army in ruins, the Israelites attacked with renewed strength. The courage that sprang from their trust in God was reflected in their fight, and Sisera's army was crushed. The Canaanites began to flee in panic, trying to escape the impending destruction. The victory was swift and decisive. The Israelites pursued the soldiers trying to escape and annihilated Sisera's forces, securing a historic victory. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a demonstration of God's power, who had fought alongside Israel. God had not only given the victory to Israel, but also made Sisera's defeat a clear testimony of his divine intervention. Sisera, seeing his defeat imminent and realizing his army was being destroyed, tried to escape the battlefield. He knew his only chance of survival was to flee and find shelter somewhere safe. But what he didn't know was that, although he had escaped the battle, his fate was already sealed. His flight would be his final desperate attempt to save his life, but he was about to face something that even his military strength couldn't avoid. Sisera's defeat didn't just mark the end of a battle. It was the prelude to the fulfillment of Deborah's prophecy, where a woman would be responsible for his death. As victory echoed among the ranks of Israel, Sisera was still running, believing he could escape divine judgment. But his fate had already been sealed, and God's power would continue to manifest in unexpected ways. Israel's victory wasn't just a victory over the Canaanites, but a demonstration that God is sovereign over everything, even the most powerful armies. After the decisive battle, Sisera found himself completely defeated. His army had been crushed, his iron chariots were stuck in the mud, and the survivors were fleeing in desperation. The Canaanite general, realizing the situation was hopeless, made a desperate decision. He would abandon his army and flee on foot, seeking refuge. With the Israelite soldiers hot on his heels, he ran across the field, aimlessly, fear clearly etched on his face. His mind, accustomed to planning war strategies, was now completely overtaken by the need to escape. His eyes were fixed on any sign of shelter, any place where he could hide and perhaps find some ally who would take him in. Along the way, Sisera strayed farther and farther from the battle. His body, exhausted from the run, began to give out, but he couldn't stop. He needed refuge. It was his only remaining chance. His thoughts were clouded by frustration and defeat, and he couldn't imagine what was about to happen. Finally, after running for several miles, he spotted a tent in the distance. It was the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, a Canaanite who, curiously, had good relations with the Canaanites. Jael was a woman known for her hospitality, and Sisera, seeing a possible salvation, ran toward the tent with all the strength he had left. Thinking he could find safety and help, Sisera approached Jael, eager to enter and rest. Little did he know, however, that this would be the place where his escape would come to an end. The woman he sought to hide from would become the one responsible for his death, fulfilling Deborah's prophecy in a way no one could have predicted. Exhausted and out of options, Sisera finally found what he thought was his salvation, Jael's tent. It was situated in a secluded area, far from the battlefield, which seemed like the perfect place to hide. Unaware of what was to come, he approached the tent with a desperate expression, hoping to find refuge far from the Israelites. Jael, the wife of Heber, a Kenite with friendly ties to the Canaanites, was surprised to see Sisera approaching. But contrary to what he expected, she showed no fear or hesitation. Jael was a wise woman, and upon realizing Sisera's desperate situation, she understood he was fleeing from battle and certain defeat. She also knew the significance of the moment and the role she was about to play, even though no one else knew yet. With a welcoming smile, Jael invited the general inside. "Come in, my lord, don't be afraid," she said, offering him refuge and comfort. Knowing he was exhausted and probably hungry, she brought him milk and a blanket so he could rest. Sisera, so tired and relieved to find a safe place, accepted immediately. He had no idea that Jael already had a very different mission in mind. a mission that God had ordained, and that she, though humble and discreet, would be the key to fulfilling his will. Promising rest, Sisera settled into the tent, thinking he could finally escape death. He was so worn out from fleeing that he soon fell into a deep sleep, unaware that his life was about to end in a completely unexpected way. Jael, with surprising calm, knew exactly what to do. Deborah's prophecy was about to be fulfilled, and she, without hesitation, would play her part, ensuring Sisera did not escape his fate. Inside the tent, the atmosphere was peaceful, with only the sound of rain hitting the canvas and the rustling of the wind outside breaking the silence. Sisera, completely exhausted from the battle and his escape, was deep in slumber. The fatigue, combined with the comfort of a safe place, made him relax, unaware of the danger he was about to face. He was so immersed in sleep that nothing around him seemed to matter, nothing would wake him. Jael watched him calmly. The woman who until that moment seemed like just a common wife of a Canaanite man was now at a pivotal moment. She knew what was happening, she knew the role she had to play, and her heart was steady. Deborah's prophecy, which said that the honor for Sisera's defeat would go to a woman, was about to be fulfilled in a way no one could have imagined. Jael, with serene composure, took the hammer and peg, simple tools she used in her daily life, but now they would become instruments of divine justice. She approached Sisera with silent precision, not in a hurry, but with a determination that reflected her trust in God. He had no idea what was happening, so lost in sleep that his breathing was heavy and regular, and his body seemed relaxed and defenseless. With a swift and decisive motion, Jael raised the hammer and drove the peg into Sisera's head, piercing his skull with force and accuracy. The sound of the hammer striking the peg echoed in the tent, but the Canaanite general was already dead, having had no chance to react. Jael looked at him for a moment, her gaze firm and resolute, knowing she had just fulfilled a divine mission that would change the course of history. Sisera's death was not just a military victory for Israel, but the fulfillment of God's word. Deborah, the prophetess, had said that the honor for Sisera's defeat would belong to a woman, and Jael was that woman. She wasn't seeking fame, she didn't expect to be exalted. Her action was simple, but full of purpose. She knew that the leadership Israel needed was more than just the power to fight. It was above all, a power given by God to fulfill his will. Jael then covered Sisera's body, remaining calm and waiting for the right moment to share what she had done. She knew her story would spread, but for her, the most important thing was that God had used her to accomplish something grand and necessary for the liberation of Israel. The news of Sisera's death quickly spread. When Barak, the Israelite commander, arrived at Jael's tent, his heart was racing, still trying to understand the magnitude of the victory. He hadn't expected to find Sisera's body there, and upon seeing the fallen general, a mixture of emotions took over him. Deborah's prophecy was unfolding before his eyes, and he realized he would not have the honor of victory, as he had hoped. The woman he hadn't believed in, the one he had asked to accompany him in battle, was now the one responsible for defeating Israel's most powerful enemy. Jael, without hesitation, told him what had happened. With a calm look, she explained how Sisera, believing he was in a safe place, fell into a deep sleep, unaware that the woman who had welcomed him would be his executioner. Upon hearing Jael's words, Barak felt a mixture of admiration and understanding. He had followed Deborah's guidance, but deep down, he knew the victory wasn't his. The credit for Sisera's defeat, just as Deborah's prophecy predicted, would go to a woman. Barak remained silent for a moment, staring at the body of the Canaanite general and reflecting on how everything had unfolded. He remembered Deborah's words, and something inside him settled. It wasn't the time to claim glory, but to acknowledge that God had fulfilled his promise in an unexpected way. The honor, after all, would go to Jael, the simple woman who, without hesitation, had carried out the divine will. Deborah's prophecy wasn't just a prediction of an event. It was a powerful message about God's plan, which often doesn't unfold the way humans expect. The victory was Israel's, but it was a victory that brought a deep lesson about humility, faith, and trust in God's power to act where no one would expect. With his heart still heavy from the surprise, Barak couldn't fully believe what he was seeing. He had led the Israelites to victory, but the scene before him, Sisera's body stretched out and immortalized by Jael, brought a mixture of emotions that were hard to process. He had followed Deborah's command, trusting her guidance, but now the truth was clear. The victory and the honor of defeating the great Canaanite general wouldn't be his. He had to understand that the victory was something bigger than his own leadership. Barak looked at Jael, the woman who had fulfilled the prophecy and destroyed Israel's enemy, and for a moment, a wave of humility washed over him. He knew he had been part of the process, but the courage, faith, and action of Jael were undeniable. She, without hesitation, did what God commanded, while he, with his hesitation, had asked for help. He, the military commander, was not the one who defeated Sisera. Jael, an ordinary woman, made the impossible happen. Barak's role was, indeed, completed, but the true glory belonged to Jael. As the Israelite soldiers arrived and observed Sisera's body, they understood the magnitude of what had occurred. This was not an ordinary victory. It was the mark of a divine action, the fulfillment of a greater plan, and evidence that when God acts, leaders and warriors, men or women, become instruments of his will. The glory would not be Barak's, but God's, and once again, the Israelites learned that true victory was never in human power, but in the strength of the Lord. Barak, seeing Sisera's body and reflecting on what had happened, also knew that the defeat of the enemy wasn't just a military victory. It represented Israel's liberation from Canaanite oppression and, perhaps more importantly, a lesson about the importance of trusting God and following his plans, even when they don't seem to make sense to us. He knew that true strength was in the divine power that, through a courageous woman like Jael, had defeated one of Israel's greatest enemies. With the death of Sisera, the most feared figure among the Canaanites, and Israel's glorious victory, Jabin, the king of Canaan, knew his reign was in grave danger. For 20 long years, he had oppressed the Israelites with the weight of his power, relying on the strength of his iron chariots and the strategic skill of Sisera to maintain control. But now, with the fall of his general, the tide of his victory was beginning to turn. When Jabin heard of Sisera's defeat and Jael's courage, he understood that the winds of war had shifted. He was lost. The Canaanite army was demoralized, and his soldiers, who had once seemed invincible, were now fleeing in desperation. The Israelites, led by Deborah and Barak, had shown unexpected courage, unwavering faith, and a fighting power that Jabin had never considered a real threat. In a moment of desperation, Jabin gathered what remained of his army, attempting to reorganize his forces, but the fighting spirit no longer existed among his soldiers. Sisera's defeat, with divine intervention on the battlefield, had shown that even the most advanced technology, like the iron chariots, could not compete with the strength of a God who defended his people. Jabin was losing not just the war, but control of his kingdom. The Israelites, for their part, were ready to strike the final blow. With Sisera's death, the Canaanite leadership had been dismantled, and Jabin's power was crumbling. There was no longer any way to resist. With the defeat of the great general and the fall of his army, Jabin's downfall seemed inevitable. Israel's victory was not just a military triumph, but a complete liberation, marking the end of Canaanite rule over God's people. Jabin, weakened and unable to resist, was soon defeated and his authority shattered. The people of Israel, after so much suffering and oppression, finally saw justice done. The victory over the Canaanite king brought not only peace, but also a profound sense of gratitude and renewal among the Israelites. The Lord, once again, proved that his mighty hand was with his people, and no enemy, no matter how strong, could resist divine power. With Israel's victory over Jabin and the Canaanites, and the end of the long-lasting oppression, a sense of exultation and gratitude filled Deborah and Barak's hearts. The people of Israel had been set free, and God's action was clear in every step of this victory. To celebrate and immortalize that moment of liberation, Deborah and Barak composed a song that echoed the greatness of God and divine power in the battle. To the sound of melodies and words full of reverence, Deborah and Barak sang their victory song, reflecting not only the triumph over Jabin's army, but also the recognition that the victory was not theirs but God's. The song was a public declaration of divine sovereignty, a form of praise to God for his miraculous intervention on the battlefield and for delivering his people. Across the land, let the righteous rise, Deborah sang fervently, her voice echoing like a declaration of faith. Let the children of Israel glorify the Lord, for he fought for us. It was not our strength nor our wisdom, but the hand of the Lord that set us free. Barak, with his heart full of gratitude, joined in Deborah's song, his words reinforcing the greatness of what God had done for them. Each verse narrated how the Lord intervened in the battle, how Israel's forces, under his direction, defeated the mighty Canaanite force. They also sang about the brave warriors who had fought courageously and about the women who, like Jael, played a crucial role in the victory. The song not only celebrated the military victory, but also served as a reminder of faithfulness to God, a testimony of how he answered his people's cries and delivered them from oppression. The song became a way to immortalize what they had experienced and teach future generations about the importance of trusting God, even in the most difficult battles. As the song spread throughout Israel, it echoed as a symbol of faith, courage, and gratitude. Everyone, from the oldest to the youngest, recognized that without divine help, they would not have won. It was a celebration of liberation, but also a promise that whenever the people of Israel remained faithful to God, he would be with them, fighting their battles and ensuring their victory. The music, therefore, became not just a celebration of the present, but an inheritance for the future. An eternal reminder that victory was possible when the people united in faith and trust in the Lord. Deborah and Barak's song was not just a melody of victory. It carried with it an immense weight in its words, like a time capsule, meant to preserve forever the memory of what God had done for his people. In a time without printed books or recordings, oral tradition was the most powerful way to pass on stories and teachings. This song, therefore, became a vital tool in transmitting the faith and history of Israel to the generations that would come. With each verse, the people not only celebrated the victory over the Canaanites, but they were reminded of God's faithfulness. The song spoke of the Israelites suffering under oppression, but also about God's redemptive power. It highlighted the courage of Deborah and Barak, God's miraculous action in the battle, and the importance of trusting in the Lord. Every word of the song told a story of how, even in times of hopelessness, God never abandons his people. The children, the young, and the adults of Israel began to sing those words in their homes, at festivals, and during celebrations. Those verses became a way to renew faith. When future generations sang Deborah and Barak's song, they would be reaffirming that, just as God had delivered them from Jabin's oppression, he would continue to be the refuge and strength of his people. The song also served as a reminder that victories are not just the result of human effort, but of divine intervention. This was crucial in times of peace, like the one that now reigned in Israel. In celebrating the victory, the Israelites were not to forget that their strength did not come from themselves, but from God, and that in times of future challenges, the only true answer would be faith in his guidance. The importance of the song also lay in its pedagogical role. It was not just to be sung, but also taught, repeated, and reflected upon. In every note and every word, the generations of Israel were reminded of their history, their struggles, and most importantly, their relationship with the God who had delivered them. Deborah and Barak's song, therefore, was more than a song of victory. It was a link of faith that connected the past to the future, an inheritance that would continue to inspire and strengthen the people of Israel for many years. In times of war or peace, when challenges became great or small, Deborah and Barak's song would serve as a beacon, lighting the path of trust in God and reminding everyone that he would never leave them. After the victory over the Canaanites, Israel experienced a rare and precious period of peace, something the people hadn't known in a long time. The oppression of Jabin and Sisera was finally behind them, and the land of Israel, once marked by war and suffering, now flourished. Under Deborah's leadership, the Israelites lived 40 years of stability and prosperity, a time of tranquility that seemed to reflect God's faithfulness to his people. During these 40 years, Deborah continued to govern as a judge, leading the people with wisdom, courage, and unwavering faith. Her leadership was not only political, but also spiritual. People came to her, not only to settle disputes, but also to hear words of guidance and learn how to live in accordance with God's will. Under her leadership, Israel prospered, and the peace that prevailed was not just the absence of war, but true harmony, where people lived in justice and honor. In this time of peace, many Israelites began to remember God more often, not just when they were in danger, but also in moments of blessing and prosperity. Deborah and Barak's song, which had been sung in celebration of victory, became a symbol of how God had freed his people, and now, with peace reigning, the people dedicated themselves to worshiping him and thanking him for his goodness. However, as always happens, peace also brought with it a sense of comfort, and over time, younger generations began to drift away from the lessons of the past. But as long as Deborah lived, she remained the guardian of Israel's memory and faith. She firmly upheld the need to remember what God had done for them, always guiding the people not to fall into the trap of complacency, but to remain vigilant in faith. During those years of peace, Deborah's figure solidified not only as a political leader, but as a true spiritual mother of Israel. Her name became synonymous with wisdom, justice, and faith. She was a beacon of light for the nation, guiding them in every important decision and helping to keep the focus on what truly mattered, the covenant with God. But like all phases of life, the period of peace would not last forever. Still, the 40 years of tranquility were crucial in reminding the people of Israel that, while peace was a gift from God, true security came from obedience to Him. And as much as peace was a blessing, Israel's real strength lay in staying faithful to God, with or without war. The impact of Deborah in Israel couldn't be measured only by the 40 years of peace she brought, but also by the deep and lasting legacy she left for future generations. Her leadership, courage, and faith formed the foundation for a new type of leadership in Israel, where both women and men could be equally recognized for their ability to serve God and His people. After her death, the people of Israel did not forget Deborah. The songs she and Barak had sung still echoed in the mouths of many, passed down from generation to generation. The memory of her wisdom and her ability to judge fairly and impartially continued to inspire. Her story became an example of how true leadership doesn't depend on power, but on the willingness to serve God and others. Deborah was also remembered for her prophetic vision. She was not just a political and military leader, but a spokesperson for God, guiding the Israelites in difficult decisions, always attentive to what the Lord said. Her ability to hear God's voice and apply His instructions to the practical situations of daily life earned her respect not only as a judge, but also as a prophetess, someone with a direct connection to the divine. Moreover, Deborah's courage in assuming a leadership position in a deeply patriarchal society was an impressive feat. Her story served as a reminder that God does not look at human stereotypes and is not limited by cultural norms. He chooses those with a heart willing to fulfill His will, regardless of their gender or social status. This reality transformed the way the people of Israel viewed women in their society, offering a more inclusive and just perspective. Deborah's wisdom also reflected in how she encouraged the people to maintain peace with God. She knew that, even in times of peace, it was necessary to seek God's presence in everything they did to avoid falling into complacency and straying from the Lord's paths. Her leadership was not based on imposition, but on the persuasion of divine truth and trust in His justice. Deborah's legacy was more than a simple memory of a great leader from the past. It was a flame lit in the heart of Israel that continued to illuminate the way long after her departure. Her story served to show that anyone, regardless of their position, could be a powerful instrument in God's hands. She inspired both men and women to seek justice, courage, and faith in their own lives, reflecting the values she embodied. Deborah's story would never be forgotten, and her legacy of just, faithful, and courageous leadership would continue to be a source of inspiration, reminding the people of Israel that God chooses those with a sincere heart for His cause, and that true strength lies in serving the Lord with all one's heart. And so, we come to the end of this incredible journey through the story of Deborah, an extraordinary woman who, with her courage, faith, and leadership, changed the destiny of Israel. Her story continues to inspire generations, reminding us that true leadership comes from the willingness to serve God and others, no matter the challenges we face. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, don't forget to leave your comment below. We want to know what you thought about Deborah's story and how it impacted you. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more content like this. And by clicking the bell, you'll always be the first to know when a new video is released. Leave a like too. It really helps spread this message and inspire more people. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video with more inspiring stories. See you then.